Hello aviators, Sky here, and today we will take a break from the race of technologically advanced machines and take a contrast shower. It's time to get acquainted with an aircraft that is almost the exact opposite of them. A small, cheap, and not at all advanced vehicle. However, while some people like combat aircraft and business jets and others don't, almost all aviators are ready to declare their eternal love for this aircraft. The most popular, widespread, and adorable winged friend, the Cessna 172. So, the Cessna 172 Skyhawk is a single-engine piston plane developed by Cessna Aircraft in the early 1950s. The most striking example of the saying, "Simplicity is the key to success." The aircraft is still in production, and more than 44,000 units have been delivered. Yes, the Cessna 172 is the most produced aircraft in history. The history of this aircraft is very long. It began, of course, with its predecessor, the Cessna 170. The 170 was a very good plane. The brainchild of the early post-war era, it began mass production back in 1948 and absorbed the legacy of the aviation industry of its time. A high-wing aircraft of simple design, a tail with rounded surfaces, a piston engine, and a classic two-leg landing gear with a tail wheel. The plane was good and very popular. From 1948 to 1956, more than 5,000 units were produced. However, evolution is evolution, and in the early 1950s, the company began creating the next model. Again, evolution, not revolution, so no one was going to do anything incredible. It was necessary to correct the shortcomings of the previous model and make additional improvements so that the new model would be successful and relevant. It's funny, at that time they hardly understood how successful and relevant their new model would be. The prototype, which was still called Model 170C, made its maiden flight in the early 1955, and soon already full-fledged prototypes of the future Model 172 took to the skies. For the most part, the design of the aircraft was similar to the old ones. However, the engineers revised the tail unit, making it more angular. Plus, the fin was slightly enlarged, improving controllability. One of the main differences of the new aircraft was the new landing gear, a classic tricycle with a front rotating leg. This design was more complex and slightly increased drag, but it had invaluable advantages. Firstly, the plane now stands horizontally, which, whatever one may say, is nice. At that time, it was a sign of modernity and made being on the ground more comfortable. Secondly, and more importantly, all processes on the ground, primarily taxiing, have become much simpler and more convenient. In addition, the aircraft received the updated 145 horsepower Continental 0300 piston engine. Simple, reliable, and economical. The new solutions were very much to the taste of the clients. Already in 1956, the number of aircraft produced reached 1,400, and by 1960 this figure exceeded 4,000. Then, the 172A version was released, with a number of small improvements, a lower landing gear and stabilizers with a slight sweep. Then there was version B, with an increased takeoff weight and a new name. It began to be called Skyhawk from this point. Then, in theory, there was a period when the 172 model had to be replaced with something new. But as it turned out, further serious changes overcomplicated the aircraft, and this is a different market niche and different models. So, the 172nd continued to be modernized and received different versions. Over time, their number exceeded 25, and there could still be more in the future. One very impressive phenomenon can be added to the Cessna 172 in terms of production. The model was mass-produced from 1956 to 1986, and after that, work seemed to be closed. But the demand for them turned out to be so great that even the wild number of aircraft on the secondary market was not enough, and Cessna, seeing that they had abandoned the gold mine, returned. Production was resumed in the 1990s, and continues to this day. This aircraft has currently been produced in quantities of more than 44,000. In its niche, it is the absolute leader, despite the fact that initially it wasn't reaching for the stars, and by modern standards it seems as simple as a shovel. But this is the main advantage. It is simple, cheap, and accessible. If the Volkswagen Beetle was an airplane, it would be the Cessna 172. the simplest organism that has conquered the whole world. They are literally everywhere, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. In the US, there is probably not a single airfield where at least one of these would not fly. According to the FAA registers, about 21,000 aircraft are operated in the country, half of those produced over the entire time. The aircraft is operated both in personal use and by various commercial and government operators. Everything from companies providing air tours to US Air Force academies. In Russia, the aircraft is also quite popular due to its efficiency and possibly original advertising. In 1987, during the Cold War, German amateur pilot Matthias Rust landed on the Red Square in the middle of Moscow, and he landed in a Cessna 172. So, let's take a closer look at this machine. We have a meeting scheduled on the territory of the Kubinka airfield. This is a significant place, the location of the 237th Center for Display of Aviation Equipment, named after Soviet Marshal Ivan Kozhedub. The full name is even longer. But in short, the Russian Knights and Swifts aerobatic teams are based here. Kubinka is a joint airfield, so such monsters as the Su-30SM coexist here with cuties such as our Cessna. So, the Cessna 172 in its very classic form. Here you can immediately see the maximum simplicity of the design. You can use it to tell children how airplanes work. The airframe is made primarily of aluminum. It looks, of course, not as nice as some new composite aircraft, but also not as rough as many other representatives of general aviation. The deflectable control surfaces are painted green here, so they are clearly visible. Everything here is according to the textbook. The empennage is horizontal and vertical, there are ailerons and flaps on the wing. The tail also has a trimmer surface. Controls are carried out using cables and rods. This is enough for a small aircraft, and besides, it will be completely controllable even with the failure of the power plant, electronics, and so on. An interesting point is that the metal on the surface of the airframe is quite thin, so the more loaded control surfaces are corrugated. This allows it to keep the weight low and at the same time makes the structure stronger. There are also struts to strengthen the connection between the wing and the fuselage. Inside the wing, classically, fuel tanks are located. Flight ranges vary quite considerably depending on the modifications of the aircraft and flight conditions. But in principle, they easily reach 1,200 kilometers, so it's quite enough for local travel. Of course, one of the original bonuses of the 172 is a tricycle landing gear with a front rotating leg. The main gear legs seem shockingly thin at first, but they are very strong. In addition, the aircraft has a takeoff weight of about 1,100 kilograms, so the landing gear easily supports both the aircraft on the ground and shock loads during landing. The brake drives are also located here. The design is quite simple, but it retains all the functions. The front leg is more complex, one wheel, steering mechanism, and shock absorption. Again, everything is in place. It is worth saying that with each modification, the landing gear of the aircraft changed, sometimes slightly, sometimes greatly. There is even the 172 RG version, with retractable gear. The classic Cessna 172 cockpit has 4 seats, 2 for pilots in the front, a small sofa for 2 more in the back, and a trunk behind it. The glazing is wide, not an F-16 of course, but quite enough for normal piloting. The windshield extends slightly onto the wing, above the pilots' heads, and the glazing continues at the back. This window in Cessna is called OmniVision. In winter clothes, turning your head so much in the plane is not very comfortable, but it looks stylish, similar to the rear windows of sports cars of the 1930s. There are 2 doors, and they probably personify the degree of simplicity of the aircraft. The design is no more complicated than the door of Grandpa's truck. The power plant. Usually it is represented by the classic Continental or Lycoming horizontally opposed aircraft engines, with 4 cylinders, power in the range somewhere from 150 to 200 horsepower. But our aircraft is special. It is diesel. Here we need to describe some features of diesel power plants. Diesel engines have a high energy conversion ratio, so their efficiency is impressive, decent power with modest fuel consumption. In addition, their work process is less picky about fuel quality. These advantages play a role in the modern transport industry. While among ordinary passenger cars diesel is quite common, in heavier equipment it is completely basic. Trucks, trains, ships, almost always. And now the disadvantages. Diesel engines lose efficiency at high speeds. There is a slightly different process, and fuel in the cylinders does not have time to burn out. The engines have a more complex structure, and additionally, the structure itself is subject to greater stress. So due to the strengthening for increased reliability, they are usually heavier. For cars and ships, this is not that important, but in aviation it becomes unpleasant. However, modern technologies, for the most part, manage to maintain the advantages while eliminating disadvantages. In this case, our Cessna is equipped with the Continental CD-155 diesel engine. They are part of a whole family of Centurion diesel aircraft engines of various sizes and power. The use of solutions such as variable propeller pitch, lighter alloys, and electronic control made it possible to adapt the engines, at least for general aviation. There is, of course, a contradiction here. Cessna's focus is on simplicity and reliability, but here is a completely new power plant with a complex design and also a bunch of electronics. On the one hand, it looks like an ocular scope on a shovel, but on the other hand, the aircraft's performance is much better, and it's not just about cheaper and more accessible fuel. The consumption is much lower, which means that with the same tanks, the flight range will increase, and decently so. Among the advantages, there is one more, which I will talk about when we get to the cockpit. The Cessna itself continues its campaign of conquest. One of the most important advantages of the aircraft is its mass availability in itself. Due to the fact that there are so many 172s and they are distributed almost everywhere, owning them turns out to be even easier and cheaper. It is easy to register because regulators are familiar with it. It is easy to maintain because there are plenty of spare parts, and the technicians already have extensive experience. And of course, it is easy to fly. The 172 is like a bicycle, which made it a perfect training aircraft. Many tens of thousands of pilots who now fly thousands of aircraft, from small propeller aircraft to giant airliners, once began their journey into the sky on this very plane. And now let's continue about the bicycle. Among aviators, you can hear many beautiful speeches that small aircraft are easy to master, and the Cessna 172 is no more difficult than the average Toyota. The average person here, of course, will think, well, sure, to a professional pilot flying a Boeing 747, a small Cessna seems simple, yeah. So, my friends and I decided to conduct an experiment on me. It just so happens that I am more of an engineer than a pilot, so I have little piloting experience. Not a bad option for a guinea pig. The conditions were quite simple. First, I train, just familiarizing myself with the technique and a few hours on the simulator, no epic courses. And then I get on a real plane and see what happens. The first stage is the Red Bird Trainer, which is surprisingly simple. The fact is that full-fledged certified flight simulators are usually very complex and expensive. In the case of general aviation, they can cost more than airplanes. Here, thanks to the use of simpler technologies, it was possible on the one hand to save money, and on the other hand to retain all the necessary functions, which made it quite popular in different countries. In our case, the simulator is tailored for this Cessna 172, and the feeling here is almost completely the same as on the original. Dashboards, yokes, toggle switches, headsets. Some interfaces are replaced with a complete simulation on the monitor, one of the ways to save money. The original Garmin aviation systems can be very expensive. It took some time to master all of this. Interfaces, system control, engine and fuel mixture control, but nothing particularly complicated. A few days in this thing and your fingers will find everything on their own. This is what the simulator is made for. It's one thing to know in theory where all the toggle switches are, and another when you feel the yokes, pedals and switches in real life. In addition, here you have the opportunity to pilot it in a way that you wouldn't have the audacity to do in real life. The hydraulic cockpit tilt units do a good job of simulating overloads. How can you not try that? So, After relatively mastering the simulator cockpit, we begin to master the cockpit of the real aircraft. Their cockpits are slightly different. There is a certain variety in the dashboards of different aircraft of the same family, but it is limited. By and large, all instruments have the same functionality. It will take about 5 minutes to get used to it. And here, we can return to the advantages of our diesel Continental. The presence of a large number of electronics, although it complicates the design, greatly simplifies piloting. This aircraft is equipped with a full authority digital engine control system, also known as FEDEC. This wouldn't surprise anyone on an airliner, but in general aviation it's a decent bonus. It is somewhat reminiscent of an automatic transmission. You don't have to constantly monitor the engine. You don't have to control everything down to the smallest detail. There is no knob for controlling the fuel mixture at all. It is also regulated by a computer, so it turns out easier than on a simulator. Of course, I didn't fly alone, but under the strict guidance of an experienced pilot who gave valuable advice, I handled the plane quite well. Not GTA of course, but this was real. You just need to relax, and the flight becomes wonderful.
Ты, смотри, не напрягайся, ты, Слава, у тебя сейчас сломаешь штурвал. Руки не напрягай. Ты держишь так, знаешь, держишь как женщину, чтобы ей было не больно и чтобы она не убежала, понял, да? Вот и все.
Some complication of the aircraft systems is unlikely to seriously affect its safety, and the reliability of the 172 itself has been confirmed 100 times over. As an example, I'll just say that the earliest aircraft of this model are still flying, and aircraft with tens of thousands of flight hours on the secondary market will not surprise anyone. In addition, the Cessna 172 was part of a record-breaking duration flight. The record is quite exotic. In 1958, a team of people who received a plane that had recently appeared on the market conducted an unusual experiment. They took the plane into the air and performed a continuous flight for the maximum duration without landing. Fuel and food were brought on board from the ground using a truck capable of catching up with the aircraft flying at low speed. The record was set and has not been broken to this day. The Cessna 172 spent 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes and 5 seconds in the air. This thing flew for more than 2 months without serious problems. Reliable? Quite. We flew a circle above the airfield, and from the height there was an excellent view of the base and the fighters standing on the concrete. Although I only saw all this in the recording, because during the flight I could not take my eyes off the instruments and the front view. The cost of the first flight for an anxious newcomer. The most difficult stage is landing, but we were lucky with the airfield. A 2.5 kilometer concrete runway is quite enough for the Cessna 172. In general, the flight was very invigorating and proved that aircraft such as the 172 are not difficult to master and are deservingly considered so simple and popular. Positive note: write in the comments what you think about this airplane and all the shenanigans described above. And if you want to watch the videos early, see some exclusive behind the scenes content, or just support the channel, consider joining our Patreon community. Fast flights and soft landings to you.